A young nurse lost her job after saving an old veteran from teenage assault. 24 hours later, 250 Marines pulled up at her home. The evening was still young that Monday in New York when Emma finished her shift. Little did she know what was laying ahead waiting for her. She had taken just 5 steps outside the hospital entrance when she caught sight of the ugly scene. 3 furious teenagers were assaulting an elderly man. They had him cornered against a graffiti-tagged brick wall, kicking at his ribs, demanding his wallet, his watch, his dignity. The man was old, far too old to defend himself. His white hair was matted with blood, and his arms, trembling with age, offered little resistance to their cruelty. One of them, barely 16, yanked at his jacket while the others shouted and laughed like it was a game. Emma stopped in her tracks, the sterile white walls of the hospital now a distant memory. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. The exhaustion of her 12-hour shift melted away, replaced by something sharper, righteous fury. Without thinking twice, she intervened. "Hey," she shouted, her voice slicing through the alleyway like a blade. "Back off." The teenagers froze for a split second, startled by her presence. One of them turned, sneering. "Mind your business, lady." But Emma wasn't just any lady. She was a nurse, a protector of life. Her instincts were carved by years of witnessing suffering, and she had no tolerance for cowards who preyed on the vulnerable. She stepped forward, despite her slender frame and trembling hands. She could feel her legs wanting to hold her back, whispering warnings, but she ignored them. In her mind, there was no question. Someone needed her. "I said back off," she growled, louder this time. "The cops are already on their way." It wasn't true. She hadn't even reached for her phone yet. But the lie came naturally, a weapon of survival she hadn't known she carried. The oldest of the boys, maybe 17, narrowed his eyes at her. "You serious?" She held a stare. "Try me." And then, just like that, they ran. A mix of nerves, fear, and maybe even shame propelled them away, their footfalls echoing down the alley as they disappeared into the dark. Emma stood frozen for a moment, her own breath heavy, her heart punching her ribs from the inside out. And then she turned to the man. He had slumped down against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, bleeding from his forehead and mouth. One eye was swollen shut. His hands trembled as they tried to cover his exposed wallet and watch, the very items the boys had tried to rip away. Emma knelt beside him, the cold of the pavement seeping through the knees of her scrubs. Gently, she wrapped her jacket around his thin shoulders. "You're okay now," she whispered, brushing dirt from his forehead. "I've got you." He coughed, wet, weak, and tried to speak. "Don't try to talk yet," she said softly, checking his pulse, assessing his injuries like second nature. "Help is coming." "No, listen," he rasped. She leaned closer. "My name? Walter. Walter Briggs." Emma paused. The name hit her like a flicker of recognition. It wasn't common, not for someone his age. "You're a veteran?" she asked. He gave the faintest nod, barely perceptible. She noticed then the faded military tattoo on his forearm, just above the bruises. The dog tags tucked inside his shirt, glinting faintly in the lamplight. The realization shook her. "Hold on, Walter. Please," she urged, pulling out her phone and dialing emergency services. As the dispatcher answered, her voice took on the practiced calm of a professional, but her fingers were trembling. She gave their location and a rundown of Walter's condition. As she spoke, a distant sound rose, a soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. She turned. It wasn't the boys, just a pedestrian. Mid-30s, wearing headphones, frozen now at the sight of the scene. He pulled out his phone. Emma thought he might be calling for help, but no. The light from the screen betrayed his intention. He was filming. Her stomach twisted. Not because she was being recorded, she didn't care, but because Walter deserved privacy, not an audience. Still, she said nothing. There were bigger things to worry about. She turned back to Walter. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered again. She gently pressed gauze from her kit, never far from her bag, against a gash on his head. "You're safe now." A siren wailed in the distance. Walter's good eye opened slightly. His lips moved. "What's that?" she asked, leaning close. "You're brave," he whispered. Not many would stop. Emma blinked away the sting in her eyes. "Well," she managed a small smile, "you've probably seen braver." His face, battered and wrinkled, twisted into the faintest smile. "Not lately." The ambulance lights turned the alleyway into flashes of red and white. EMTs rushed in, Voices overlapping, orders exchanged. Emma stepped aside, explaining what had happened, what she'd observed. She watched as they loaded Walter onto the gurney. He looked at her one last time. "Thank you." And then he was gone. The alley fell quiet again. Emma stood alone, wrapped in silence, lit only by the fading beams of ambulance headlights. Her jacket lay crumpled on the ground, stained with someone else's blood. Her hand shook, not from fear anymore, but from the adrenaline draining from her system. The bystander was gone, too. She picked up her bag and started the walk home. Her steps felt heavier now, not from fatigue, but from the weight of what had just happened. It would take her a few blocks to realize she was still holding Walter's dog tag in her hand, a small, accidental keepsake that would soon mean more than she could ever imagine. In the hours that followed, the city moved on. New York, in all its endless motion, barely paused. But something profound had shifted in that alley, something unseen by most. A stranger had stepped into harm's way for another. A nurse had become a guardian, and an old veteran had, once again, been shown honor. Not with medals or flags, but with courage in the form of a young woman who refused to look away. Unbeknownst to Emma, the video had already hit the internet. Unedited, raw, real. A woman in scrubs, standing between darkness and decency. A name that meant nothing to the world just yet, Emma Carson, spoken in whispers that were quickly becoming headlines. But in that moment, she wasn't thinking about virality or praise or even consequence. She was just thinking, I did what I had to do. And somewhere, in a hospital bed across the city, Walter Briggs was thinking the same. The world was already watching before Emma Carson even opened her eyes. While she lay curled beneath a worn quilt in her small apartment above a noisy corner deli in Queens, the internet pulsed with her face. The video, shaky, grainy, caught in the muted haze of an alley security light, had captured the exact moment she stepped into chaos and chose compassion over caution. A woman in hospital scrubs, confronting 3 teenage boys mid-assault, shielding a battered elderly man without hesitation, then kneeling beside him to offer care. The way she wrapped her jacket around him. The way her hands moved with professional certainty, even as they trembled. Someone had filmed it from the edge of the alley and uploaded it. A caption sat beneath the footage like a spotlight. Nurse saves elderly veteran from assault. Real hero. #NYC, #everyday hero. It took minutes to be reposted. Hours to explode. First TikTok, then Twitter, then Reels on Instagram. Then the algorithm took over, and soon, television segments ran it between updates on the weather and the markets. Comment sections lit up in every language. She didn't even think twice. This is what courage looks like. Someone give her a medal. Anyone know who she is? And one night, Emma's name, still unknown to her, was already trending. But in the small hours of that morning, Emma was still asleep. She stirred just past 6:30, awoken by the usual buzz of delivery trucks below and the whistle of steam from her radiator. Her limbs ached from the double shift the night before, in the memory of the alley, of Walter Briggs, of his bleeding lip, of the boys fleeing, hovered like a dream at the edge of her thoughts. She hadn't told anyone yet. It had happened so fast, so strangely, and once she'd seen him safely into the ambulance, she'd walked home in silence and collapsed into bed. She shuffled into her kitchenette and poured herself a mug of coffee. The bitter scent filled the small space, grounding her. She smeared butter on toast, propped her phone against a jar of peanut butter, and opened her usual apps, news, messages, the hospital scheduling group chat. That's when she saw it. Her thumb froze. There it was. Nurse caught on video saving World War II veteran from attack in NYC alley. She stared, not quite processing. Tapped the link. The video began to play, and it was like watching someone else. The footage was jerky, the audio faint, but there was no mistaking it. Her face. Her voice. Her trembling hands brushing blood from the forehead of an old man while the city kept moving around them. It was raw. Intimate. Too real. Emma didn't know how to feel. Her face flushed, not with pride, but with vulnerability. This moment, this personal, instinctive choice, was now public property. She scrolled down. The video had millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. She didn't finish her toast. Instead, she changed into fresh scrubs, pinned her badge to her chest, tied her hair into a bun with hands that shook only slightly, and headed out the door. The 5-block walk to the hospital had never felt so long. Everything was the same, yet somehow nothing was. The deli man nodded at her a beat too slowly. A woman crossing the street paused and squinted, her mouth parting in recognition. At the hospital entrance, two orderlies standing near the smoking area looked up and fell silent. Emma nodded to them politely, entering the sliding glass doors with a stiff breath. Inside, the energy was strange. Eyes followed her, subtle and not so subtle. A nurse she knew in passing offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. In the hallway, Tom, her usual charge nurse, met her with a glance, nodded, then kept walking without a word. She tried to ignore it, told herself it was admiration, curiosity. People didn't know what to say to someone who'd gone viral overnight. But something felt off. She reached the break room and dropped her bag onto a chair. Danielle, a young nurse from the next ward over, looked up from her phone. "Morning," Emma said, forcing lightness into her tone. Danielle smiled faintly. "You okay?" "Yeah," Emma replied. "Just weird morning." Danielle nodded once. "You should check your messages." Before Emma could respond, her hospital-issued pager beeped. Administration. Immediately, her stomach dropped. She didn't even have time to process the message before she was on her feet, walking the sterile halls toward the administrative wing. Every footstep echoed with a weight she hadn't expected. Her hands were cold. Her breath felt shallow. She knocked on the frosted glass door once, then opened it. Inside sat three people: Mr. Gallagher, the HR director, Ms. Lynn from risk management, and Dr. Weaver, the chief medical officer. The air in the room was still and clinical. Not one of them smiled. "Emma, come in," Gallagher said, gesturing to a chair. She sat slowly, fingers curled in her lap. "We want to talk to you about the video," he began. "The one taken outside the hospital last night." Emma nodded. "I saw it this morning." "We're aware you were involved in the incident depicted," Lynn said, her voice cold and clipped, "and that you rendered aid to an injured individual during what appeared to be a criminal assault." "I did," Emma said, her voice steady. "An elderly man. He was being beaten. I stepped in. I helped him until EMS arrived." "We understand," Gallagher said. "And your intentions are not in question." Emma blinked. "Then what is?" Dr. Weaver leaned forward. "You were in uniform, wearing hospital-issued scrubs and a visible ID badge. You administered aid without clearance or supervision. You engaged directly in a violent situation without notifying authorities or hospital command." "I called 911, Emma replied. "And he was bleeding. He needed help. I didn't have time to check a policy handbook." Lynn raised a hand. "Your actions, though well-intentioned, have placed the hospital in a difficult position. You are now publicly associated with our institution through this video. Any legal or reputational fallout could extend to us." Emma stared at them. The words hit her one by one, like cold raindrops soaking into her skin. "You're saying I embarrassed the hospital by stopping a mugging?" she asked. "That's not the language we're using," Gallagher said. "But yes, you acted outside the scope of your professional duties while visibly representing this hospital." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I saved someone," she said quietly. "No one is questioning that," Dr. Weaver said. "But as an institution, we have to follow protocol." Then Gallagher slid a folder across the table. Inside was a termination letter. Emma stared at it. Her name, the formal tone, the legalese. Termination effective immediately. The world outside was calling her a hero. But inside this room, she was being discarded like a liability. Her throat tightened. "You're firing me?" she whispered. "Your contract is being concluded in accordance with policy," Lynn said flatly. Emma said nothing. There was nothing to say. She closed the folder. Her fingers had stopped trembling. She wasn't shocked anymore, just empty. "Thank you," she said softly, rising to her feet. No one stood to shake her hand. No one said goodbye. She walked out, the door clicking shut behind her like a final note. Back in the hallway, the hospital buzzed with business as usual. Phones rang. Nurses typed notes. Patients were wheeled past. But for Emma, the world had stopped. The walls she had known, the place she had poured her heart into, now felt like another city. As she passed the reception desk, someone murmured her name. Another nurse turned to look. Emma kept walking. When she reached the street, she paused just beyond the glass doors. The air was colder than it had been earlier. Harsher. She felt it settle on her skin like ice. She looked back once at the building she had served in for nearly 3 years. The place she'd cried in, grown in, given her best to. It didn't look back. She walked home in silence, The video still climbing in views. Messages still pouring in. The internet praising her. But no amount of praise could fill the hollow left behind. Inside her apartment, she dropped her bag on the floor and sank into the couch. The sun through the window lit the corner where her scrubs hung. Clean, ready for the next shift that would never come. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. She had saved a life. And for that, she had lost her place. Still, in her heart, she knew she'd do it again. And out there, the world kept watching. But inside, Emma Carson sat quietly, alone with the weight of doing the right thing and the silence that came after. The city kept moving, but Emma didn't. She walked home in silence, her footsteps echoing off the damp pavement like the final beats of a war drum. The chill in the early afternoon air wrapped itself around her coat, and for the first time since the morning, she felt the weight of her body. Not the usual fatigue of a long shift, but something heavier, something internal. A deep weariness, like her soul had been scooped out and left somewhere she couldn't retrieve it. The streets of Queens were still buzzing. Delivery vans honking, kids running with backpacks, dog walkers shuffling by. And yet, it all felt like a different world now. She was no longer part of the machinery, no longer in uniform, no longer belonging. She reached her building, a faded brick structure she'd once loved for its character. Now it looked tired, like it had aged with her. She climbed the stairs without looking up, as if lifting her gaze might break her completely. Her key turned in the lock, and she pushed open the door. Inside, everything was still exactly where she'd left it. That was somehow worse. The coffee mug from the morning sat on the counter. The crumpled scrub she'd tossed over the chair still held the faint scent of antiseptic and adrenaline. The apartment felt smaller, like the walls had inched inward in her absence. Colder too, though she hadn't touched the thermostat. She dropped her hospital ID badge onto the counter. It landed with a soft clink, a quiet punctuation mark on the sentence her day had become. For a few seconds, she just stood there, bag still slung over her shoulder, staring at the badge. Her name printed neatly beneath her photo. Emma Carson, RN. She had once felt pride every time she looked at that ID. Now it stared back at her like a label she wasn't allowed to wear anymore. She peeled off her coat and let it fall to the floor. Her hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water, though she wasn't thirsty. She sat on the edge of her bed, not because she meant to, but because her knees gave out. Her elbows on her thighs, her head in her hands. The silence was deafening. Her phone buzzed from across the room. Once, twice, then again, in quick succession. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. She picked it up. 42 missed notifications. Half of them were news outlets. Requests for interviews. Invitations to speak. Quick responses wanted for tonight's evening broadcast. Producers calling her the voice America needs. Others just asking for a soundbite. The other half were strangers. People she didn't know, but who now knew her. Comments from all over the country. All over the world. You're a hero, Emma. Thank you for standing up for him. My grandfather served. You brought tears to my eyes. If the hospital won't stand by you, we will. You did the right thing. Emma stared at them. Read each one. Her thumb scrolled of its own will, but her mind was somewhere else. Because behind every kind word, she felt a deeper question that haunted her. Was it worth it? She replayed the alley in her mind. The sounds came first, the slap of a shoe on pavement, the barked laughter of teenagers who had never known what it meant to be afraid. Not really. Then her own voice, rising, shaking, commanding them to stop. The way Walter had looked at her. Broken, bleeding, grateful. She had seen so much pain in the hospital, on gurneys, behind curtains, on surgical tables. But this had been different. Raw, unfiltered. She remembered the silence right after they fled. The eerie quiet of the alley when the violence had retreated but left its footprints behind. The sirens growing louder. The wetness of blood on her hands. The metallic scent in her nose. And now, the nothingness. The job gone. The badge discarded. The world outside called her brave. Inside, she felt like she had lost everything. She rose to her feet and wandered toward her tiny desk in the corner of the apartment. There, beneath a small stack of unopened mail, sat her budget notebook and a red folder of bills she hadn't had the energy to organize in weeks. She flipped it open. The numbers stared back at her like open wounds. Her checking account was nearly empty. Rent had cleared just last week. The next mortgage payment on her late father's house, still under her name. was due in 10 days. The utilities were overdue by nearly a month. She'd been pulling extra shifts just to stay afloat. Every night she'd skip dinner. Every holiday she'd volunteered for. It had all been just enough to keep the lights on. And now? She ran a hand through her hair. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. She had nothing to fall back on. Her degree, her license, her experience, they couldn't cover a month of bills without a job to back them. And who would hire her now? In every job application, someone would Google her. They'd see the viral video. They'd see her face. Her act of heroism. Her termination. And they'd see a risk. Another buzz from her phone. This time, she answered. It was her friend from nursing school, Lily. Emma, I just saw everything. Lily's voice cracked through the speaker. What the hell happened? Emma wanted to say something. Anything. But the words stayed trapped in her throat. They fired you. Lily continued. After that. That's insane. You saved someone's life. Emma finally managed to whisper. They said I broke protocol. A long pause. Are you okay? Emma almost laughed. But the sound that came out was closer to a sob. I don't know, she said. Lily offered to come over. Emma declined. She wasn't ready for comfort. Not yet. The pain was too new. Too raw. She couldn't be brave again. Not tonight. After hanging up, she moved to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. A soft drizzle tapped at the glass. The kind of New York rain that didn't shout, but whispered, a gray, gentle rhythm like the breath of the city itself. She watched it fall for a long time. Let the rhythm dull her thoughts. She stood there until the streetlights flickered on and the headlights below left gold streaks on the wet asphalt. Then she curled up on the couch, still in scrubs, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again. She silenced it. She couldn't take another message, another well-meaning stranger who saw her as a symbol when she felt like a mistake. Her eyes stung, and without meaning to, she cried. Softly, quietly, not from sadness alone, but from exhaustion, from anger, from grief. From the quiet betrayal of a world that praised courage but punished it behind closed doors. Tears soaked into the pillow as she turned her face toward the wall. The hum of the radiator, the rain, the occasional honk outside, it all blurred together into a lullaby of sorrow. And there, in the dim light of her apartment, Emma Carson lay still. No cameras, no applause, no comments flooding in. Just her. And the silence. She had done the right thing. She knew it. Every fiber of her being told her so. But knowing that didn't make the hollow disappear. She closed her eyes and let the sound of rain carry her deeper into the quiet. Morning arrived with no fanfare. Emma sat at her kitchen table, still in the oversized t-shirt she had slept in, nursing a half-cold mug of coffee. The mug was chipped, like most things in her apartment, but familiar. The only sound was the soft creak of her chair and the muffled hum of life outside. She hadn't slept much. The night had passed in fragments, dreams full of alleyways and judgmental boardrooms and sirens that never stopped wailing. Her eyes were puffy, her face drawn. She looked nothing like the woman the world had seen online. There was no poise in this version of Emma, just quiet, heavy exhaustion. The phone was on silent beside her. She hadn't checked it since yesterday evening. It had become a burden, not a lifeline. Every time she unlocked the screen, more requests poured in. People wanting her to relive the moment. Networks dangling interviews, podcasts asking for her thoughts. But no one wanted to ask her the most important question. Are you okay? She took another sip of coffee and stared blankly at the wall. The apartment around her seemed unchanged, and yet nothing felt the same. The scrubs that once symbolized identity now hung limp on the back of a chair like the remnants of someone else's life. The badge sat on the counter where she'd left it. Untouched, unmissed by the people who had taken her title away. Then, something strange happened. A sound. Faint at first, a low rumble, like thunder, but rhythmic, steady. Emma paused mid-sip, tilted her head. It wasn't thunder. It was too mechanical, too alive. The rumble grew louder. She stood slowly, walking toward the window, bare feet brushing the cold tiles as she moved. The mug stayed in her hand. Part of her braced for another fire truck, or maybe some construction crew too early for decency. But this was different. It wasn't one vehicle. It was dozens. The sound of engines in sync. Tires rolling over pavement in a powerful, unified growl. She reached the window. Her breath caught. The street below was no longer an ordinary New York block. It had transformed into something surreal, something cinematic. Lined from end to end were military vehicles. Humvees, motorcycles, jeeps, all parked with eerie precision. A sea of camouflage uniforms stretched across the street like a formation laid in stone. Emma's eyes widened as she stepped back, pressing a hand to the glass. There were Marines, hundreds of them, lined up shoulder to shoulder, still as statues. Young and old, black and white, men and women, a brotherhood bound by the same code, now gathered beneath her window like an honor guard. Flags stitched on their shoulders. Medals pinned to chests, steel in their stances. She couldn't breathe. The rumble settled into silence, replaced by the low hum of engines idling, boots crunching on pavement, radios clicking softly. Neighbors were now spilling out of their apartments, on balconies, at doors, phones out, jaws dropped. But the Marines paid them no attention. They were here for one reason. Then she saw him. At the front of the formation, flanked by two younger Marines, stood Walter Briggs. He looked like a man reborn. Gone was the battered figure from the alley. In his place stood a soldier, sharp, proud, commanding. He wore his full-dress uniform. Medals across his chest, hat perched just right, cane planted firmly in one hand, though he barely seemed to lean on it. He was no longer a victim. He was the embodiment of valor. And he was looking straight at her window. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. She backed away, then turned in disbelief. Her hands trembled. She dropped the mug. It shattered against the tile, coffee spreading in a pool by her feet. A knock at the door. She froze. Another knock, firmer this time, followed by silence. Barely breathing, Emma walked across the apartment, stepping carefully past the shards of porcelain. She reached for the door handle, but her hand hovered. Her mind spun, confusion, fear, all blending in a haze of adrenaline. Finally, she opened the door. And there he was. Walter Briggs stood tall in her doorway, framed by the morning light and a silent wall of Marines behind him. His eyes met hers with warmth and a kind of ancient gratitude. He raised one hand in a slow, deliberate motion. A salute. You saved one of ours, he said, his voice deep and steady, aged but unshaken. Now we've got your back. Emma's lips parted, but no words came. She felt her knees wobble. The world tilted. Behind Walter, 250 Marines lifted their hands in unison. The sharp snap of military salutes cutting through the air like thunder. The sound was deafening in its silence, a gesture that carried weight beyond any speech, any medal, any press release. Emma's hand found the edge of the doorway, steadying herself. Her breath hitched. Tears blurred her vision. For a moment, she stood between the old world and the new, between disgrace and redemption, isolation and belonging. And then, something inside her cracked. Not from sadness, but from awe. From the weight of being seen. From the echo of a simple truth. She had not been forgotten. The man she had saved had remembered. And in doing so, he had brought an army with him. She didn't cry, not yet. The moment was too big for tears. Too sacred. Her body refused to break in front of them. She simply nodded once, as if accepting something unspoken. An understanding that had passed silently between uniform and civilian. The Marines lowered their salutes as Walter took a slow step forward. I hope you don't mind the visit, he said, voice quieter now. Just for her. I asked around. Saw your name on your badge that night. I never forgot it. She blinked, still breathless. Your HR wouldn't give us anything, he continued. But one of the EMTs remembered the street where they picked you up. Then someone called a friend of a friend. Took us one night. Emma stared at him in disbelief. Walter smiled just slightly. Marines know how to find their own. Behind him, the formation didn't move. No orders were barked. No ranks were called. This wasn't a stunt. It was a statement. Emma glanced past Walter, watching the faces of the Marines. Young men and women who hadn't even been born when Walter served. Older veterans with lined faces and quiet pride. Their presence was louder than any press conference. They hadn't come for cameras. They had come for her. Her knees nearly gave way, but she caught herself. Stepped outside. Her bare feet touched the cool concrete of the hallway as Walter extended a hand. She took it. The moment held. Just a young nurse in pajamas. Just a decorated veteran with a cane. And between them, a bond that no hospital board could erase. For a few eternal seconds, the world paused. New York held its breath. And in that stillness, Emma Carson realized something she hadn't dared to believe since the day before. She had done the right thing. And finally, someone had shown up to say so. The knock at the door had changed everything, but what came after felt like something out of a dream. Emma sat on the edge of her couch, her bare feet tucked under her, trying to make sense of the surreal morning unraveling before her. The door was still half open, letting in the sound of idling engines and distant city noise. But inside was stillness. Walter Briggs sat in the armchair opposite her, his cane resting against his knee, his dress blues perfectly pressed. His chest bore the weight of service in rows of polished metals, but his eyes held something even heavier: gratitude. Around them, the room had quietly transformed. Marines moved through the small apartment like respectful guests at a sacred gathering. Not a word was wasted, not a movement out of place. Some stood guard at the door, blocking the view from nosy neighbors with solemn composure. Others moved with purpose, setting down folders, quietly unpacking bags, helping gather the few items Emma had to her name. She tried to speak, but her voice felt strangled by the lump in her throat. One Marine, a woman maybe her age, gently folded Emma's coat and placed it in a suitcase on the floor, her movements tender, deliberate. Another walked in carrying a clipboard of documents, placing it silently on the table with a nod to Walter. Emma looked between them all, lost. What's happening? She finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. Walter leaned forward, resting his weathered hands on his cane. Emma, he said, with the softness of someone offering something sacred, we didn't just come to thank you. She blinked. I don't understand. Walter gestured to the stack of folders. We came to honor you. He nodded, and the young Marine with the clipboard stepped forward. Miss Carson, he said, his voice crisp but kind. On behalf of the United States Marine Corps, active and retired, we've taken steps to ensure your future is protected. A private fund has been established in your name. Donations have already exceeded what we expected. Emma stared, not quite comprehending. Walter smiled gently. Your mortgage? Paid in full. She gasped. He continued. You've also received offers from 3 veteran-run medical organizations, clinics, research teams, places that won't ask you to apologize for saving someone's life. Emma shook her head slowly, tears springing to her eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Walter replied. You already did. That night in the alley. She looked down at her hands, still trembling in her lap. She wasn't sure if it was shock, or awe, or something deeper, something spiritual. Something like grace. Another Marine stepped forward, a tall, older man with silver at his temples and a presence like a monument. In his gloved hands was a folded American flag. The kind given at funerals. The kind draped over caskets. But this one was different. As he placed it in her lap, she noticed the embroidery stitched along one corner. Emma Carson for courage beyond the call. She stared at it, her breath shallow, her fingertips brushing over the name. Her name. The older Marine stood back in line. The room held its breath. Walter's voice cut through the silence with the weight of conviction. You didn't just save me, Emma, he said. You reminded us what we fight for. She looked up. Her eyes met his. And she broke. Tears streamed down her face, freely now, silently, without shame. She clutched the flag to her chest like an anchor, like it was the only thing keeping her from floating away. It was heavy in her arms, not in weight, but in meaning. One of the Marines stepped forward and handed her a simple envelope. Inside was a letter from a general, handwritten. Below it, a card bearing a security clearance badge. A pass to enter any Marine facility in the country, honorary access, the kind rarely given to civilians. Another folder contained a relocation offer. Should she ever want to move, the Corps would handle every detail, no questions, no cost. But the biggest gesture wasn't in the documents or the flag or the money. It was the presence. These men and women, people she had never met, had dropped everything to be here, to show up for her in the way she had shown up for one of their own. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Emma reached out and took Walter's hand. It was firm and warm and trembling, just like hers. Why me? She whispered. Walter tilted his head, eyes kind. Because you saw a man lying in a gutter and didn't look away. Because you stood where others might have walked. Because you proved to us that the values we swore to protect still exist. Out there, in people like you. She looked down at the flag again, her tears soaking into its corners. The apartment was silent, but the silence was full. Full of honor. Full of gratitude. Full of everything the hospital had refused to give her. In that moment, the walls of her apartment, once so small and cold, stretched to hold something vast. A legacy, a purpose, a home. As she looked up again, the Marines all stood at attention behind Walter, shoulder to shoulder, back straight, eyes forward. It wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what she had stood for. And they had come to stand for her. The camera would have panned wide, if there had been one, framing her in soft morning light, sitting with the flag in her lap, surrounded by a sea of silent guardians in uniform. She looked small, but not powerless. Humbled, but not broken. She had entered the day as a nurse without a job, a woman discarded by a system too blind to see. She now sat as someone reborn, wrapped in honor, debt erased, future rewritten. And in her lap, resting against her heart, was not just cloth stitched with stars and stripes, but the symbol of something she hadn't expected to find again: belonging. The storm didn't begin with a headline. It began with a photograph. One image, Emma Carson, standing barefoot in the doorway of her apartment, clutching a folded American flag to her chest, surrounded by hundreds of Marines standing in perfect formation behind Walter Briggs. It spread like wildfire. No filter. No edits. Just raw, undeniable honor. A still frame that seemed to capture the essence of everything the world forgot it needed. By noon, it was everywhere. The first headline landed like a bolt of lightning. Hero nurse fired for saving veteran, honored by 250 Marines. It was on every screen. It was on the ticker crawling across cable news. It was pinned to the top of every social feed. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who was Emma Carson? Why was she fired? And who, exactly, thought that was okay? Within hours, the backlash began. People didn't just read the story. They felt it. It had the clean, painful structure of myth, a humble nurse punished for doing the right thing, vindicated not by institutions but by warriors. The public wasn't just angry, they were furious. The hospital's name was plastered across digital picket lines. Hashtag reinstate Emma, hashtag justice for Emma, hashtag we stand with Emma. By that evening, protesters stood outside the hospital's glass entrance. Not a massive crowd, but loud enough to make the board nervous. Their signs were hand-painted and raw. She saved a life, you fired her. Heroes deserve jobs, not pink slips. Would you have let him die? Veterans joined in, dozens at first, then more. Some came in wheelchairs. Others walked stiffly on prosthetic legs. Some hadn't worn their uniforms in decades but brought them out anyway, as if this cause was worthy of dress blues. They didn't chant much. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Then came the media vans. Local stations turned national. Reporters stood in front of the hospital, reciting the same opening line in a dozen variations. Tonight, the question remains, why did a hospital fire a nurse for saving a man's life? Inside the boardroom, panic simmered. The press office scrambled to issue a statement. The CEO went silent. One board member resigned. Another tried to walk back earlier policy claims. Legal teams whispered frantically about precedent, liability, optics. By the third day, a new headline dropped. Hospital board offers job back to hero nurse after massive backlash. The call came that afternoon. Emma was seated on the floor of her living room, surrounded by envelopes. Letters had poured in. Cards from strangers. Drawings from children. A note from a Marine widow in Kansas. You reminded me of why my husband put on the uniform. When her phone rang, she recognized the number instantly. She answered it with calm curiosity, not bitterness. Miss Carson, the voice said, attempting cordial formality. This is the board. We've been following recent developments. We'd like to talk about your return. Emma smiled just a little. I appreciate that, she said. A beat of silence followed. We want to apologize for how things were handled. You've shown tremendous courage and professionalism. Your story has moved the nation, and we'd be honored to welcome you back. Emma looked out the window. The street was quiet now. The Marines were gone, but their presence lingered in her chest like the echo of a drumbeat. I'm not coming back, she said gently. The silence on the other end thickened. I'm grateful for the opportunity you gave me, she continued, but the moment you saw my instincts as a liability instead of an asset, we parted ways. You don't get to change your mind because the world disapproves. Is there anything we could do to There is, she interrupted. Treat the next Emma Carson better than you treated me. She hung up. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt clear. Later that day, another call came. This one was different. A small veterans clinic just outside the city. founded by retired service members, staffed by a team of civilian and military doctors. No corporate ladder, no soulless policies, just healing and honor. The voice on the line was warm. Ernest, we heard about you. We watched everything. And we thought, this is the kind of nurse we'd be lucky to have. There was no pressure, no negotiating, just an invitation. Come be part of something built on purpose. Emma said yes. And a week later, she walked into her new job. The clinic was tucked into a modest 2-story building with a small American flag flapping above the front door. The paint on the walls was sun-faded in places, and the reception desk looked like it had seen better decades. But the energy, the soul, was unmistakable. The minute she stepped inside, she was greeted by a receptionist who offered a smile that felt real, not rehearsed. "You must be Emma," she said. "They're all waiting for you in the break room." Emma followed the soft buzz of conversation until she reached a cozy space at the back. Inside, a dozen people stood waiting: doctors, nurses, techs. Some wore scrubs. Some wore polos with embroidered emblems of the clinic. Some wore nothing but kindness on their faces. The man at the center stepped forward and extended his hand. "Welcome to the team," he said. Emma shook it, her grip firm despite the weight of nerves in her chest. There were no photographers, no flashing lights, no chants. Just a quiet handshake and a room full of people who saw her, not as a headline, not as a hashtag, but as a healer. Her first day unfolded like a soft exhale. She walked the halls. She met patients, men and women who had carried burdens she couldn't imagine. Some smiled when they heard her name. One old veteran whispered, "I saw what you did. Thank you for standing up for us." Another, an amputee in a wheelchair, joked, "They don't fire people for being brave around here, do they?" Emma laughed for the first time in weeks. She helped with blood pressure checks, filled out intake forms, took vitals. Nothing extraordinary, nothing viral, just honest, quiet work. The kind that didn't make headlines, but made a difference. During lunch, she sat at a table with 2 other nurses. One had served in Iraq. The other had worked in emergency response during 9/11. "You did what we all hope we do," one of them said. "You acted, and the system didn't know what to do with that." Emma shrugged, a soft humility in her posture. "I didn't think," she replied. "I just saw someone who needed help." "Exactly," the other nurse said. "That's what makes you one of us." That night, Emma stood in front of the clinic as the sun dipped low over the city. The American flag above her fluttered in the wind. She felt the soft weight of the stitched one still folded at home. It wasn't just fabric. It was a turning point. A vow. She wasn't famous anymore. The headlines were fading. The media had moved on to newer stories. But what stayed, what lasted, was something deeper. She had found a place where her courage wasn't penalized. She had found redemption, not through noise, but through purpose. As she looked out over the street, she whispered to herself, barely audible, "I'm home." The air was crisp that morning, just cool enough to carry the scent of freshly cut ribbon and something else Emma couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe. Closure. Redemption. A year had passed. 12 months since an alley, a camera phone, a boardroom, and a battalion of Marines had turned her life inside out. What had once felt like collapse now stood rebuilt, beam by beam, on the sidewalk in front of her. Above her head, in bold bronze lettering, the sign read, "The Emma Carson Veterans Health Center in honor of courage without compromise." Beneath it, the morning sun bounced off a polished metal plaque mounted near the main entrance. It read, "On April 22, 2024, Nurse Emma Carson was fired from her hospital job after saving the life of a U.S. veteran in distress." The action that cost her a position became a movement that redefined service, compassion, and honor. This clinic stands as a living testament to the idea that doing the right thing is never the wrong choice. Emma stood silently in front of it, dressed not in scrubs or a borrowed coat, but in a simple, elegant navy blue suit. A small gold pin of the U.S. flag rested at her lapel. Her hair was pinned up, a few wisps curling loose in the spring breeze. At her side, sitting upright in a polished wheelchair, was Walter Briggs. He looked thinner than he had a year ago, his skin paler, his movements slower. But his eyes were sharp, and when he turned to look at her, they were filled with the same unshakable loyalty that had driven 250 Marines to her doorstep. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "You ready for this?" she asked. Walter smiled. "You were born for this." Rows of chairs faced the building's front steps. Community members, veterans, staff, and reporters filled every seat. Some held small flags, others clutched tissues. A few were in uniform, saluting the flag as it waved above them. But all eyes were on Emma as she stepped forward to the microphone. The hush that fell over the crowd was complete. Emma took a breath and let the quiet hold her for a moment before speaking. Her voice, when it came, was steady, but not rehearsed. Exactly 1 year ago, she began, I walked out of a hospital I loved, thinking I had lost everything. She paused. A few nods, a few tears, rustled through the audience. I believed I was being punished for doing what was right. I remember feeling small, angry, even ashamed. Her eyes found Walter in the front row. He nodded once, slow and proud. But what I didn't know, she continued, was that a single act of kindness, a decision made in the blink of a moment, would become the foundation for something so much bigger than myself. She gestured to the building behind her. This center exists not because I'm special, but because so many others, veterans, nurses, neighbors, strangers, decided that honor still has a place in this world. They gave me a second chance. And today, I get to return that gift every single day in these halls. She took another breath, this one shakier. I thought I lost everything. But sometimes, doing the right thing brings you home. Applause swelled, not a polite ripple, but an honest, thunderous response. Emma stepped back, blinking quickly as the weight of it settled in. Walter was the first to clap. Then everyone else followed. A Marine stepped forward, handing her a ceremonial pair of scissors wrapped in ribbon. Emma and Walter leaned in together, their hands meeting at the center. Together, they cut the ribbon stretched across the entrance. Cameras flashed. Flags waved. Cheers erupted. But for Emma, time seemed to slow. It wasn't the press or the plaque or even the applause that made the moment sacred. It was the truth of it. This place was more than a clinic. It was a sanctuary built from the ashes of a moment no one thought would matter for more than a week. But it had mattered. It had grown into something lasting, something alive. Later, inside the building, she walked the halls for the first time as director. Photos lined the walls. Portraits of veterans past and present. Quotes from nurses, medics, and heroes unsung. The scent of fresh paint lingered with the faintest hint of coffee and antiseptic. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, falling on polished floors and the soft murmur of people already being cared for. She passed the reception desk, where the same Marine who had helped fold her coat a year ago now managed the front check-ins. He gave her a quick, proud nod. "Morning, Director." Emma smiled. "Morning." In the waiting room, an older woman sat holding the hand of a young veteran who stared nervously at the floor. Emma stopped to greet them. "First time here?" she asked gently. The young man nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "You're safe here," she said softly. The woman blinked away a tear and whispered, "Thank you." Emma continued down the hall. A nurse walked past her, one of the newer hires, a former Navy corpsman. They exchanged a quick look that said more than words ever could. Respect. Trust. Brotherhood. Emma reached the final room of the wing, where a small framed quote had been mounted beside the door. She paused to read it. She already knew the words by heart. The bravest acts are often the quietest. She touched the frame, then turned to look down the hallway once more. A year ago, she had been a nurse with no job, a woman discarded for her conscience. Now, she was walking through a building that bore her name. Not as a monument to herself, but as a promise to everyone who had ever stood alone for what was right. She had come full circle. And in doing so, she had built a home not just for herself, but for countless others who needed to believe again in people, in purpose, in the quiet power of doing the right thing. If you enjoyed the story of Emma Carson and Walter Briggs, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you feel about Emma's journey, her sacrifice, and how it all ended? Drop your rating on a scale of 1 to 10 and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters. Was justice served? Did the ending feel right to you? Let us know in the comments below and be part of the conversation. This story was built on courage. Now it's your turn to reflect and respond.